the main topic for which we would want this interview to be done is the evolution and institutionalization of science advice mechanism in India. So that's the larger topic that we are trying to cover. And we would want to know from you the evolution of science advice mechanism in India from your personal experience, specifically focusing on SAC-PM and because you've been a core part of that.
Of course, science advice mechanism in this country has always been evolving. Naturally, everything evolves. I will paraphrase the science advisory mechanism since independence rather than the last 25 years alone.
Right. Yes, sir. That is what we would love to hear.
So, India was one of the very, very few countries which evolved a science policy as early as 1958. In fact, the scientific policy resolution precedes the report that led to the National Science Foundation in the US. Scientific policy resolution was 1958. But at that time, the science advisory process in this country depended on the wisdom of individuals like Homi Bhabha. Homi Bhabha was a tall person who had science and rationality, all that process. So scientific policy resolution was essentially the 1 3/4 page document of articulation of a principle of science support in this country. Then, of course, it took 25 years. That's in 1958. It came to a technology policy statement, which is TPS 1983. At that time, the technology policy statement is the result of a certain changed context. India was facing technology denial post our Pokhran experiments. So, technology self-reliance had to be built in. And the technology policy statement of 1983 led to a lot of reverse engineering principles, and that was a process by which the statements talked about India becoming self-reliant. But prior to that, until 1971, there was no science ministry in this country. And it is the sixth plan of India, which made us allocation for science in budget. It so happened that when G. Subramaniam was Minister for Planning, they developed a science advisory process at National Council for Science and Technology, which involved 1,500 people participating in this, the bottom-up movement. It led to the formation of Science Ministry itself. The Department of Science was formed at that. But all these, I think 58 policy, scientific policy resolution, technology policy statement of 1983 are all expression of a political will for supporting science in this country. But they never talked about investment into science. The first statement of science policy, science technology policy of 2003, it talked about investment into science. And that was a statement which led to for developments of today's science education in this country. But it is in 2000, there was an office of principal scientific advisor constituted. In the earlier times, there was another mechanism of science advisory council to the Prime Minister. The council mechanism, it's a group of experts came together, discussed this among them, and they gave the Scientific Advisory Council, provided documents to the Prime Minister, we need this, we need that. But it's not still an institutionalized process. The principal scientific officer, the office of principal scientific advisor, is a pretty institutionalized process that happened in 2000. But that's why it's celebrating close to 25 years of PSI's office. And the first principal scientific advisor our Abdul Kalam, who later on became the president. And he held this office. And he, having come from strategy sector, used the measurements and tools that are normally used for strategic thinking processes. The office of the Principal Scientific Advisor brought strategic thinking into science advisory process as the PSA's office post 2000. Between 2004 to 14, there were two processes happening simultaneously. There was Scientific Advisory Council of the Prime Minister, there's Office of the Principal Scientific Advisor. But I must tell you, the two mechanisms, although were concurrent, they were not contradicting each other, they're complementing each other. And we cannot say one is showing higher importance or anything of that kind. Fundamentally, governments want to invest into science for a national goal, national objective. The scientists want to improve science for the sake of knowledge itself, not necessarily for delivering a national goal, national target, and so on. But you must understand, India is in the Committee of Nations, not alone. They're not an island. What happens is that the world will influence us also. It turns out, there was a time, people like us in science stream will talk about what is good for science. And now, nations ask what is science good for. We need to ask what science can help the people, what can science help the nations. So it is only in 2000, it so happens, the Office of the Principal Scientific Advisor of this country started at about the time where the world was started investing into innovations. Up until 2000, more than 80% of the investments will come from a group of few nations. So innovation was primarily in the game played by developed countries and for technology advantage in the marketplace.
Right.
In 2000, people realized in the power equations of the world, science has a role to play. And if we do not invest into science, invest adequately into innovation process, we will be left out of the power equation of the world. So even smaller nations, other nations started investing in significant amounts. So the 2000 was a state of change in the world. And that we embraced in the form of a PSA's office in the country. And PSA's office thought about strategic thinking, not necessarily to only the defense sector, but strategic with respect to how to invest into science for delivering goals, for increasing the strength of India as a knowledge power. Whereas the Scientific Advisory Council to the Prime Minister was focused most of the time on how to improve the life of scientists in this country. Therefore, they were complementing each other. The scientists do the science. It turns out, when I went to the government in 2006 as Secretary DST, the 2003 data were available. The number of full-time equivalent scientists in this country at that time was only 1.34 lakhs. As said, now today, for example, China has 21 lakhs and US has 14.7 lakhs. You cannot, with 1.3 lakh scientists, you cannot build a nation. You have to invest adequately. So, if we take the 2003 policy, science technology policy of Vajpayee government, it talked about investing gross expenditure into R&D, GRD, gross expenditure GRD, to 2% of the GDP. It was first statement made in 2003. Now, you can make an investment. The investment is to scientists. We don't have scientists, where will we invest upon? Not on the equipment. Equipment doesn't do science. We have to get people into it. So the 2013 policy talked about increasing the full-time equivalent scientists of this country in 2017 to 2.75 lakhs. And we are at 3.3 lakhs today. That 1.3 of 2003 moved into 3.3. That's a process of change. In the process of change, the advisory processes have to take care of what the scientists would want, what the advisory process take care of what the nation would, how the nation would invest for what purpose. So both that the purpose and the process need to be built in. So that was done. After 2013, we have found we have built the science edifice a little better. Today, in number of full-time equivalent scientists, we have done better. And it turned out, when I came to the Department of Science, in the strength of publications, the number of publications, India is 15th rank. Today we are third. We moved up. And the number of people publishing papers in Web of Science was tens of thousands, more like 10,000. Today 3.3 lakhs. So basically, we expanded this in terms of highly cited papers. In 2004, we were fringe players. Now nowhere there. Today, in 25 years later, in quantum, we are the fourth in the world, but 24, we became second. We go to the US in highly cited paper. Therefore, in terms of activity of science, we have not built a self-credible science. But now what is important is how to convert that science activity into a result for the country. How do we involve? In fact, the 2013 policy talked about India emerging as one of the 5 knowledge powers in the world in science. We said this in 2013. Now we are talking about India becoming 3rd knowledge power, the 5th to 3rd. Now, having said what I said about the science advisory process, from 2014 we are operating primarily on the Office of Principal Scientific Advisor, just as most of the developed world does. We have Office of Science in Washington, and we have office in Britain. So we have science advisors of this kind. We have an office of advisors. It's an institutional process. It's not an individual. Principal scientific advisor of this country. It's the government and not to any individual process. It has been an operational process, due diligence and assessment and so on. Since 2014, we are operating through this science advisory mechanism. At this point of time, people like me to go back and ask, okay, now changes are taking place. We have a new science policy in 2020. Now it talks about becoming 3rd knowledge power, one of the 3 knowledge powers, which we have already arrived in some form. Now we need to ask a question. Are we saying it ourselves? Are we seeing this change taking place in others' viewpoint also? So there is a center called Australian Strategic Technology Strategic Policy Center in Australia. They carry out critical technology trackers in this world. It turns out in 23 brought out a report, 24 they brought out a report. In 23 when they brought out a report, they said in the 47 critical technology areas, China has control on 36, US on 8. India is, the 3rd rank is between India and England. We are more on 26, we have presence in 20. 24 policy, which brought out a few months back, finds out there are 64 critical technology areas are mapped, out of which India has presence in 45. And we have become truly 3rd knowledge power in critical technology domains, which is the starting point. And therefore, I would like to now strengthen that advisory process. Now we have to be a little bit more strategic thinking and not just a pragmatic process. Now, I think any evolving process needs to get a feedback from others, not only ourselves. We can keep telling, we are done well. We need to have an external process. It turns out this ASPI, the Strategic Policy Center in institute in Australia, finds very important point that is being made. I will leave it to you, the PSS office, to deliberate it later. It says, India has become 3rd knowledge power, critical contributor in this domain. Okay. However, None of the Indian institutions are in the top 5. India is a country in the top 5. But none of the knowledge institutions are in the top 5. And the strategic report says what it conveys to you that Indian science is fragmented. It is happening in different places, but not concretized. That's an observation that's come out in 24 from the ASPI. Therefore, what people like me would go back and say, the strategic, our scientific advisory mechanism is evolving in this country with time, suiting the need of the time. The context changes. The context changes the content, and the content of the debate context. It turns out this process that we have as a result of all these changes. You see, when I joined the government, we brought this SERB, Science Engineering Research Board. One would ask, somebody asked me a question from science, there used to be a SE or C. Now C has become a B. How does it differ? SERC to SERB. And what we did was at that time, there's a heavy level of bureaucratization in R&D funding. Because any in the department science ministry fund release has been subjected through what we call integrated finance division, finance ministry process, clearance. Therefore, whether I give 5,000 rupees sanction or a 5 crore sanction, there are 12 signatures required. A huge financial due diligence. And it turns out, in any government process, you can't carry the money beyond the financial year. Whatever is not spent in by 31st March, you have to surrender. Now, SERB mechanism is an act of parliament body, statutory body. Therefore, the fund does not lapse. You stay with it. And the due diligence process is defined for what is required for S&T, R&D. So what used to be a 125 proposal funding per year in the DST become 2,500 proposals. What used to be a 50 crore investment in R&D funding became 800 crore in this process. And today, 20,000 proposals are being received in this country because there's a mechanism. Okay, we have done the process. Now we need to ask, it's one thing to publish papers for the country and feel good we have published papers, they're important. But I think scientists celebrating science is not worthwhile. You need to ask, scientists celebrating the people of the country. People need to be benefiting from the science pursuit. That means we have to concretize the scientific discoveries and innovations into products, into technologies, the economic processes, and eventually creation of jobs, and the increase in power equation for the world. And I'm very pleased that ANRF is the next level of process where we are engaging the private sector to absorb this technology scientists that are happening here. And while we kept talking about India not having invested 2%, we must remember, public investment anywhere in the world is only 0.7, 0.8% of the GDP. If the private sector invests about 1.2 to 1 higher percent, double of that amount. But India, major investment happened only from the government sector. Now is the time the private sector has to be brought in as not as a receiver of research, but a co-investor into research. They have to also invest into research. They have to create research capacity in the research private sector also. Therefore, PSA's office in the present context, with the support of ANRF, has to now generate new mechanisms through which the research of India, good research of India, is producing value for the country. If somebody in Australia went to say, oh, India is doing research fragmented in different institutions are doing, but no body is figuring in the top of the world, top 5 in the world, it's a statement of fact. I mean, somebody makes a comment, you can't take it for criticism. It's a statement of fact. Get observed this. Science is about objectivity. Unfortunately, we become too emotional about comments. The objective statement tells you this. So ANRF now will have to prepare consortium. You have to prepare people working together. People working together. If for example, we have leads presence in 45 of the 64 critical technologies. But we are not in the top of any one of them. What it conveys to you, the people who are leading those countries in those areas can deny you access to the technology later. And there is the technology today, in terms of sovereignty, doesn't depend only on the defense sector. Food security, energy security, this is all happening in day-to-day human beings, after life of a common man. Therefore, we need to sensibly invest into these areas and ensure that for want of knowledge or want of materials that are necessary for doing the processes, we are not at the receiving end of a power center. So we need to be in that process relevant, and the science is no longer just an activity of a scientist. Louis Pasteur said science has no country, that science belongs to the world, and science is a global citizen. That is Louis Pasteur time. But that was what, 19th century. But 21st century, we have to be careful that knowledge becomes a power. And that in the power equation, which is not about creating innovations, but those innovations which give you improvement of the quality of life of citizens. And therefore, I personally believe that the science policy advisory mechanism of the country is now reached a level of maturity. And the office of the principal scientific advisor has to build a certain internal capacity within itself to do the due diligence and provide an institutional framework of how to connect the research that is happening in the fragmented body of the research edifice into a national goal, national, let me say, strength. That's what I start.
So, if you can elaborate a bit more on that, like what was that process and your interactions like at that time, whichever you were part of, and what kind of reverse engineering model was set at that time, and what role did the Scientific Advisory Council play in that?
See, that was after we performed the first Pokhran experiment. The Western world was not very happy. And they left middle of a project and leaving us on our own because of the accommodation disease. So the technology denial became a weapon in the world economic powers. And India at that time said, okay, you want to do that, we'll do it ourselves. I remember a team went to the United States asking for technology for building a supercomputer. We were denied. And at that time, one of the first principal advisor, Kalam, was supposed to go and meet somebody and ask for 300 crores. And we'll build a supercomputer ourselves. We'll not depend on other people. And it turned out, we built it in 150 crores, not in 5 years, but in 3 years. And there was a newspaper item in Washington Post, Angry India does it. Okay, these are all stories, anecdotal stories of this country. And however, the reverse engineering comes with a price. We cannot rely on reverse engineering all the time. And it turned out, 83, when this thing came up, at that time, Dr. M.K. Menon was a scientific DST secretary, and he was part of this technology policy statement. And it turned out, he was also holding CSIR and other national institutions. So most of the CSIR lab were doing reverse engineering. If you reverse engineering something, it is only for a temporary requirement. You cannot build a nation based on past. You need to do forward engineering also. And reverse engineering cannot become a psyche of a country. But unfortunately, for a period of time, it became a psyche of a country. Just because we want to be independent You cannot keep making safety pins. Safety pin is available at lower price, right? Get safety pin from somewhere. You must make things which cannot be made otherwise. So
right.
The reverse engineering was that kind of a problem. For example, the common criticism is led to this country about our pharma sector. Our pharma sector came out the reverse engineering model. You must remember that. You see, the Section 3D of our Pharma Act was a special one. It talked about in pharmaceutical purposes alone, if a patent needs to be renewed or greening take place, it must add efficacy, increase efficacy. People-centric priority, not investor and inventor-centric priority. And that's all part of that reverse engineering model. So it turned out India was not discovering drugs, but they are developing processes which were making the drug cheaper. And it turned out when this AIDS hit the world, anti-AIDS medications are very expensive. But our product, Cipla's product, saved millions of people in Africa. There's a video called the Fire and Blood, which talks about how India's ability to bring the price of these products down saved human lives. And it is more easily reflected at the COVID time. COVID time is a very important case. There are two vaccines that came out. Okay, one had the research done in Oxford, other was done locally here. Okay, it turned out 𝐒𝐜𝐤𝐞𝐢𝐞, who the vaccine. When I was in the department, we gave him a certain money for setting a clean manufacturing facility, GMP process, for making vaccines, not for human but for animals. But they became useful when COVID thing came out, because you can't make investments overnight. And today, the vaccine process, nearly 60% of the vaccine for children for the world is manufactured in India because of our ability to produce at an affordable cost. So in pharmaceutical research, affordability is very crucial, and that has happened. But what is important? The scientists want to be the first one to arrive, but I think people want everything to be as affordable as possible for reaching the last man's stage. You need to balance between the two. Science is not about winning a trophy, and it's not about winning this prize and Nobel Prize, but it is about make science useful for people. Therefore, the reverse engineering at that time in the 80s was relevant. But a country like India, with creative minds, cannot subject itself to this negative process of reverse engineering. You have to do forward engineering as well. And I think today what is happening in critical technology domain, which is ASP, Australian Statistical System, is all about artificial intelligence, machine learning, and those kind of stuff. And what they do, interestingly, how they do this ranking of this country is only take the publications with a foresighted long-term investment, not immediate. And what they're doing, this database is Web of Science database, is what I also say. And this number of papers published and the number of papers are highly cited. And based on this, we have become one of the top 3 nations in the world in knowledge, based on this. Now, but our activity decentralized in many different forms and fragmented, and it is not, we require a coordinating mechanism to be linking people, cluster them, and really make a global impact and become a global leader. That's an important process. And the global leadership involves consolidation, concretization, and consolidation. And that process may be required for ideas like artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, and there are many other critical technology domains which are, it is not like maybe oranges and apples. This is something about something else. I'm not talking about Apple in the field, I'm talking about Apple in the computers. So I think we have to have a balance.
Are there any some of the 3-4 critical technologies that you think we are more likely to reach faster at that level that we're working towards? or what kind of more steps, like said, that a mechanism needs to be developed and where OPSA can play a role? More consolidation, computaization needs to happen. We are fragmented right now. But what are a couple of those technologies that you think we are closer to getting at the top? And what are the steps that we can do? And what role OPSA can play in making sure that in at least those 3 to 4 critical technology areas, we climb up the ladder faster?
We used to, but the office of the Principal Scientific Advisor, I'm talking about Kalam's time, used to bring out a document, technology foresights, technology vision documents, 2020, 2030 and all. And while I was in the government, we also got 2035 technology foresights. I requested a corporate cabinet committee, and we brought out and the government released the document also. Therefore, if the office of PSA carries out this technology foresight exercise periodically in terms of essentially what we need. But what I am talking about is not what we need, where we can lead. There's a big difference between what we need and what we can lead. The earlier exercises of this country essentially talked about what we would need. I think at that time our psyche was different. I guess science was to meet a need. But now our psyche is different, where we want to lead. And that leading process has to be done not by emotions and just thumping, but essentially consolidation and concretization of goals. And primarily, any strong networking of research has to be built on 3 core principles. Sharing of objectives among the whole group. Co-investments and co-generation of values. So, research in the past, distant past, I'm talking about 1920s, is an activity of a scientist in a laboratory. And that's how C.V. Raman and J.C. Bose, all that. At that time, science was done like that all world over. But today's science model is different. It's no longer the activity of individual science. It turns out we need to institutionalize the technology insight mechanism, intelligence mechanism within the PSA process. Look at what is happening in this country. You can't create something from nothing. You have to build over what is already existent in the frame. Fortunately, we are not in a land of islands anymore. We are not isolated in the process. It is a matter of time India will become truly the third knowledge power in science. It's a matter of the 2 weeks or 2 months or 2 years. But that knowledge power not only with respect to publication, it has with respect to translation. And the translational efficiency in this country culturally is weak. Nothing to do with the organization, culturally is weak. And therefore, we have to synthesize this by bringing private players into co-investments. And they need to participate in selection of the R&D priority and goal. Not scientists does research and say implement it. No, they have to participate in goal. They have to provide a demand-driven science, not supply side. We have also always followed supply side. It has been demand-driven. We have done the demand-driven work in energy, atomic energy and space. You not, I wouldn't say that even in agriculture we have done demand-driven. The supply side. Even agriculture research is supply side. In atomic energy and space we have done demand-driven. But I think we need to come back and create a demand-driven system for key sectors like energy, environment, Now we have an opportunity that does not exist for others. I think that we must create a strategy for it. What is the strategy? Why I'm saying this? Most of the developed world have reached their economic well-being, polluting the planet Earth for last 200 years. Climate change is a reality. It turns out that there is a German watch group which publishes data on compliance to Paris Accord. And if we take the top 10 nations in ranking, first 3 ranks are not given. The only nation with a large economy in the top 10 is India. India was 4 years ago 12, 6 years ago 12, 4 years ago 10, last 2 years ago 8. We moved up. Whereas the country north of Himalaya kept going down, 50 plus. Now it's an opportunity. There are 3 opportunities which I like PSA's office to study carefully. Number 1, the research done in China, the research done in America, or the majority of the Western world is highly resource intense. If resource intense innovations cannot produce results that are affordable to more than 60% global population, if the whole world were to invest at the same rate as the United States for meeting their population, the world investments for R&D would be close to $9.10 trillion. Global investment $2.1 trillion budget per parent. So $9.9 trillion investment in R&D is insane. It is not sustainable. The American model is not sustainable. Now, India is the only country in the low resource setting. It operates on low resource setting. Still be in the top 5 in the knowledge part. Now the question here, how do I leverage this capacity to do 3 things? Make these innovations affordable to at least 60% of the population is bypassed by the global research model. Therefore, it goes with the ethos of this country, of 𝐒𝐏𝐻𝐒𝐐𝐲𝐿𝐴 Kudumbam. We look at world as a fact. We do research for the world, not just for the world. That is knowledge, technology for development, not competitive edge, not for market. Technology for development. Next thing is we will talk about when the technologies that people talk about, which are people use, our carbon footprint per capita is something like a 45% of the global average. And our energy consumption is low per capita, but our human development index is 0.5. You can't call a country developed if the human development is 0.5, that will be 0.9. So how do I get a 0.9 human development index at less than 50 gigajoules of energy per person? That means you are creating new pathways. So the R&D that you're talking about have to do affordability and low carbon footprint. The lower carbon footprint part built up in this process such that our energy consumption is minimized. Carbon footprint is low. And let us take the simple sector like steel. Okay? The steel sector. The world production is 1.9 billion tons of capacity. And about 1.5 will be China. And India is about the second largest, 1.15%. The second largest producer. But steel production is a highly energy consuming sector, high carbon footprint sector. Can we move to green steel? A sector which avoids the country which is the closest to doing that is India. Because other countries are far lower in terms of carbon steel production capacity. If all these principal scientific advisors can bring a capital intensive sector like steel, bring the steel ministry into it, industries into it, bring our researchers into it, and bring the green steel reality in this country, the low carbon footprint. You'd be breaking a new path. See, primarily, we need to look at a model of affordable innovations, and we should take the low resource setting not as a weakness but as an advantage to produce innovations affordable, particularly in healthcare and food and environment. Next is, we must pick up some high energy guzzling industries which are leaving a high carbon footprint in the world, and see whether, if you are already in the second in terms of production capacity in this world, how do we move that sector into towards zero carbon or low carbon? And it is not good enough to develop technology. If they had an economy, it's a very big terms, but we have to convert the philosophy into a practice.
Right, sir.
And scientists like me tend to philosophize everything. But I think we need to remember, countries cannot keep on philosophizing, individuals can philosophize, but we have to make it practical. And that, I think, Office of the PSA is eminently possible. Key sectors, some sectors they want to do, pharmaceutical or the steel or one of those key sectors that they are important. Then in the same study, for example, Australia points out in high precision machine, India is already second in terms of capability. And precision machining is a high-tech area, truly high-tech area. We need to find out what are the strategic areas that we think the consolidation will help us for leadership. I will now share with you the Science, Technology, Innovation Policy 2013 experience. Okay. I wrote a background paper and gave it to 5 agencies: CAI, 𝐒𝐜𝐤𝐞𝐧𝐜𝐞, 𝐻𝐒, UGC, 5 agencies. Asked them to consult the country main stakeholders of science policy, of their stakeholders, what they would like to see in the science policy of India. So they held consultation meetings in different parts of India. And something like 4,000, 5,000 people participated in this work from 7 months. Their inputs were received. After that, I brought the consult, culminated into background paper into a kind of a document, and decided that we will write only 16 pages of A4 sheets as a policy document. Put up page constraint. And then I asked Ramachandran, who used to write for Frontline, to rewrite it in a language which a common can read. Because scientists write statements which are very dense in language. And scientist language, other scientists can understand, but citizens cannot understand. And we suffer from that problem of elitism. And it is not just me alone, others also. It's a good thing that I am not alone. So we requested Ramachandran to rewrite it in a language in which people can understand. Then we put it on the web, NIC web, national web. Asked for public consultation, public opinion from this policy of technology, innovation, science policy. Because the first policy which included innovation in the science policy. Previously it's called Science Technology Policy 2003. 2013 Science Technology Innovation Policy. And we defined innovation in that. Innovation are the first gainful use of knowledge and societal value. So there is the societal value of money. We defined innovation for the policy. Then, after we got this feedback, some people sent reports. Based on that, Ramachandran modified the text He gave me a document. The whole thing required 8 months for me to do this background paper to this. Then we circulated it among all the other departments of the government, so that there is a certain consultation coming from. Then it was approved with the cabinet. Cabinet was approved this time on the policy. Formally, it was released on the Indian Science Congress in 2013 by then the Prime Minister of India. It was then the President of Science Congress also, Calcutta. So 18,500 people participated. It was a scientific innovation policy. The process. This process was involving the stakeholders. But stakeholders in the sense of industry, CII, UGC, so on. And then people participated from this public consultation. It was not a document, but the scientists met together and wrote this document. Because we were capable of doing it ourselves. But it was a process of stakeholder involvement. So policy writing for a process is a process where we use a bottom-up engagement, but top-down consolidation, concretization, because it requires experience to capture what is good for the country. Most individuals are thinking what is good for themselves. Very few people can think about what the country would need apart from what they need. So the bottom-up engagement really does not provide an intelligent insight. It gives a need. So that's our idea. Okay.
But anything else about the highlights, the impact, how it was being a part of it, what were the motivations there, what were the challenges there?
You want about SAC PM?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So, I have said, because I had played role in both. Okay, at that time there were two advisory processes. Scientific Advisory Committee, Council to the Prime Minister. Scientific Advisory Committee, Cabinet.
Yeah, SAC-C and SAC-PM both.
Okay.
We can talk about both also, sir.
And it turned out the Secretary DST was coordinator for both. So Secretary DST is common to both. And Reverse Sincerity was Secretary DST for the APA. And let me now take some examples to illustrate how they complemented each other, rather than.
Yes, sir, that will help.
That's, I think the illustration is better. For example, there was a strong feeling that the science in China was growing very fast, and they were bringing people from Chinese origin people back to China, paying them same salary they were getting in America or somewhere else, and then do science in. They were trying to buy people. And our scientists also want to do similar things in India. We said, no, we can't do that. This will create, disturb the equilibrium. So Scientific Advisory Council, the Prime Minister, came back with a certain performance-related incentives for science. For example, J.C. Bose Scholarship. Basically, if the scientists had done well, they had done some publications, they were given as a contingency money to do research of what they want to do without having to depend on getting mechanism money. Research money was given as a contingency money. They can spend the way they want, freedom to spend. Scientists want two things. They want money, but they want greater freedom. They don't want somebody to say, no, you can't use it, you can't. So we provided that autonomy of expenditure to this guy. And a certain salary over salary. They were given a certain extra remuneration as well. And before the Sixth Pay Commission, most scientists were doing creative work, but their belly was taken empty all the time. So they required some financial benefits. So if you get elected to an academy, you get more money. If you get bottom-up prize, you get more money. You get a JC Bose Fellowship, get more. Because scientists' life being helped by scientific enterprise research address such issues, which are providing a little bit more money to scientists and empowering them, giving them the power of autonomy and so on. This was the case. Then, at that time, there was one Institute of Science, okay, and there were 5 or 7 IITs. So the bright children went to engineering education, but nobody came for basic science. There was a problem. Therefore, they came back and said, we'll create ICERs, Institute of Science Education Research. The ICER idea came from SACP. Inspire as a fellowship scheme to the system came from us, came from the department. But we brought people into science, basic science. Today, 20 to 27 lakh children have benefited in ICER scholarship, Inspire benefits. That's the number of people. 1.9 lakh top rankers, top 1% performance and BSc MSc in this country under Inspire scholarship scheme. Therefore, and it turns out 67% of the PhD fellowship program are girls who get the Inspire scholarship scheme. Therefore, the areas which are not covered are covered, and SACP provided those. These are investing into scientists and their requirement. That's the major focus of SACP. Science institutions like ICERs, new IITs, where all the elaboration happened. 61 new institutions were built in that 10 years. And the 61 new institutions building process, majority of that came from the work of Science Secretary Council reports. Okay? You have to give them back there. On the other hand, let me take SACC, because I don't want to talk about Office of PSA. I'm talking about SACC. The National Knowledge Network was the primary output of PSA, SACC, and PSA office.
Yes, NKN.
NKN really networked 71 institutions and created a digital framework on which the structure can be built. That's a strategic thinking. It's not individual, but institutional processes. The NKN came out of SACC's or PSA's office. And I will take another example for you to point out. See, there are several the RUPAC, Rural Technology, was essentially a product of SACC, PSA's office. So, I can illustrate many things which are connecting knowledge to applications, collecting knowledge to national requirements as an institutional framework was given by SACC and PSA. I think I'll give you 2 examples to illustrate the two. They are complementing, they are not competing.
Any closing thoughts on, sir, as to why science policy advice is important for a country's growth?
We need to ask what the purpose of science advice. We can't keep all the time about process. Unfortunately, but I gave a lecture at the invitation of the Prime Minister of India. And the Japanese guy, myself, and Chinese, 3 of us were inside. The Japanese came back and said, we are the most innovative nation in the world, number 1 in life. My Chinese counterpart said, we are the fastest. I made a presentation, we are number 1 in life. And will never be number 1 in anything. At the bottom line, if you are involved in a rat race, even if you are number 1, you are only a rat. We are not in the rat race of innovation. The world is focusing on process of innovation. We are in process of that. We are focusing on purpose of innovation. What's the value of innovations that bypass millions of people on my country? If the innovation does not improve the quality of life of poorer people in India, that innovation is what not much. And what PSA's office needs to bring out, the humanity element into science. The purpose of science is as important as the process. And the process of science is what is being discussed elsewhere. I'm talking about the best of worlds. I think India is the oldest civilization, and we have won the world through knowledge in the past. I recently read a history from India. Therefore, we need not become number one through technology. We have to become number one through knowledge. And that knowledge that helps everything. Therefore, I personally believe the purpose of science, reaching as many people as possible, and science for humanity. I want to ask a different question. What does Indian science mean? And where Indian science can be? And how can I make India move from where she is to where she should be? And that is a goal. That's a long journey. And I believe Indian science is doing well, but that is doing well. Is this philosophy?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your time, sir.
Thank you very much.
Yes, sir.
All the very best.